Hi, my name is Alan Thurman. I'm presenting on the jet turbine experiment. So some experimental background for this lab. In this lab, we're going to be exploring turbomachinery and familiarizing ourselves with the analysis of steady state, steady flow conservation of energy through an ideal Brayton cycle. For this experiment, we'll be operating a gas power generation station that utilizes the ideal Brayton cycle for power generation. If you look at this diagram, this is just a quick overview of the ideal Brayton cycle where you have, this is an open cycle where there's no recirculation of the working fluid. So we have air is intake into a compressor where it then is sent into a combustion chamber where it mixes with fuel. It's then combusted, which is heat addition to the system. Then that higher energy fluid then goes into the turbine, expands out, generates work, and then expels its exhaust heat into the atmosphere or sink. You could also model it with a heat exchanger there, and then that would be a closed Brayton cycle. And then some applications of this gas turbine power generation would be jet engines and airplanes, which is the open form, and then peaker power generation plants, which are power generation plants that are utilized to generate non-normal loads of electricity in the electrical grid. So if there's a super hot day where a lot of AC is being used, they use these peaker power stations to generate and supplement the grid. So some overview of the ideal Brayton cycle. We have on the right here, we have pressure versus volume, and then pressure or temperature versus entropy plots for this cycle. So the thermodynamic cycle governing this is the ideal Brayton cycle, and then the ideal Brayton cycle undergoes 4 steps. Isentropic compression. So you can see on step 1, 2, the entropy does not change, our temperature rises, and our pressure versus volume, we increase in pressure and reduce the volume, compressing the fluid. Then step 2 to 3, we do isobaric heat addition, so the pressure remains constant, the volume increases, and the temperature increases and the entropy increases. And then step 3 to 4, we do isentropic expansion, so we expand the fluid, entropy remains constant, the temperature goes down, the volume and pressure both go down, and then we have isobaric heat rejection, which is step 4 to 1, or an open cycle, this wouldn't be continued, it would just expel the air. And then for this process, we can find that the thermal efficiency is proportional to 1 minus 1 over the pressure ratio. And so to increase the efficiency of the cycle, you would want to, that's confusing. It's proportional to the pressure ratio is the important thing to keep in mind here. You can go to the next slide. And then so an overview of the experimental apparatus for this, this experiment is there are 3 major subsystems here. We have the gas turbine engine, which is this first stage here, which is just the compressor, the combustion chamber, and then the first turbine, which generates, it spins and generates the work to run the compressor. And then that air is then expelled to a second turbine, which is separate from the whole system, that spins an alternator and generates electricity, and then that air is exhausted. So there's 2 main systems there. There's a gas turbine, which is the first primary compressor, combustion, and turbine section, and then there's the turboelectric generator, which is just a turbine and an alternator. And then there's also a control panel, which has our primary readouts and our controls for the throttle and the alternator power load. Here we go, next slide. And so the main procedure, did I lose a slide here? Did you click that twice? Okay, yeah. The pre-start procedure here is first you check the area. So you're going to check to make sure that you're operating your turbine in a safe space. You're going to check that everybody has appropriate PPE, closed-toe shoes, hearing, eye protection, this thing's going to be loud. And that you have a fire extinguisher present because there is kerosene as fuel that's commonly used. I'm not sure if that's the fuel that we'll be using, but and then so then the other thing is to secure the gas turbine and make sure that all the switches are off. So the throttle's all the way down, the load is all the way down, the main cutoff switch is off, and that all the wheels are locked in place. And then you'll do an initial inspection. There's a lot of parts to this inspection, so I didn't go into much detail here, but primarily it's checking ducting and all the fluid passageways to make sure that there's no clogged lines or that like the compressor has debris or something in it that would cause damage. Making sure the oil level is correct, and then connecting air and power for the startup phase. And then initializing the DAC system is very important, so you actually get good data. And then, yeah. So starting procedure is first you turn on the master switch and verify that all the equipment on the control panel is operational. So you want to make sure that all the gauges, the digital and the analog ones, are providing adequate information. And then you press the green startup button, and then the apparatus that we have has an automated startup phase that it runs through, and it'll give you any errors on our readout LCD if there are any. And then you'll allow the process to run, and eventually it will display that on the LCD that it that is running, and then you can run whatever experiments you want to. So you can run it at full output now, and then to stop the engine, you press the right button and verify that the engine is shutting down. It's not on some sort of runaway. So some expected results here. Sample plots are provided by the apparatus manufacturer. We can see those two on the right. So those are a plot of RPM versus time and power versus time. Sorry, it's hard to see from all the way over here. And we can see that at higher RPM, it's shown to produce more power and than high load and low RPM. I think that's everything. Are there any questions? Okay. Thank you.